choo, 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 choo. It's like Thomas the Train Engine. Choo, 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 choo. Okay. 大家好，我叫 B, and I am here to fix your crappy Chinese pronunciation with my own crappy Chinese pronunciation. Hey, Bianca, if you're saying that you can help me with my subpar Chinese pronunciation skills, shouldn't you have mastered pronunciation? Or why don't you get your Chinese boyfriend on there to teach us pronunciation? I mean, I guess it would be an option, but I don't think it would be as helpful as you would think, and that was actually kind of a surprise for me too. Let me tell you a brief story. Early on in my Chinese language learning days, I was trying to read out loud. Read out one of my graded readers, and my pronunciation was trash then, even worse than it is now. It's still pretty bad, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to pronounce the word qu. My mouth just did not like it. So I asked my boyfriend, and he's like, well, you just kind of pronounce it like a chu, but make it softer and push the air a little bit faster. And I'm like, what do you mean by make it softer? And he's like use the thick part of your tongue, like not the tip area? I was so freaking confused, I had no idea what he meant. But it makes sense why native speakers would have a hard time explaining how to pronounce things for us non-native folk. It just comes naturally to them. They've never had to figure out how to pronounce. They've never had to figure out how to pronounce things. They just learned it as a child. And I don't think I would be able to explain to someone how to roll their tongues for Romanian and Spanish words. The tongue trill just comes naturally to me. It's like, I don't know how to explain that. You just do it. But as I'm trying to fix my pronunciation, I need to actively understand every single muscle in my mouth, and my throat, and my tongue. Where is my palate? Where is the roof of my mouth? How do I move sounds from the back of my throat to the front of my throat? And that's hard to express if you've never had to learn it before. So back to that story, how did I ultimately learn how to say chu? I tried an insane number of mouth and tongue positionings that I thought kind of matched the description until I found the one where he's like, oh, not bad. So today I'm going to show you how I learned some of the more challenging Chinese sounds for English speakers. And disclaimer, my pronunciation is still not 100%. I still sound like a Lao Wai. But the point of these exercises is to teach you how to self-correct. As you get better at listening, you'll learn when you sound off. So found the mouth, throat, tongue, and breath positionings where it sounds better and practice those vocalizations. Have friends or tutors correct you, and over time, your pronunciation will steadily increase. So what are some of the pronunciation mistakes that trip me up the most? Why don't we start off with that first example, chu. I realized that pronouncing the Q wasn't as hard as actually pronouncing the U with the umlaut on there. U versus U is very different. So how do you change your mouth positioning from an U to a U? You can see my face change is kind of weird with that, right? One thing is your corners of your mouth need to change. You need to kind of position them as if you were playing the flute, curl up the corners so that it's a smaller mouth positioning. And that actually forces the front of your teeth to kind of go forward, and the back of your teeth to go backwards, right? And that will help you to push the air out from the back of your throat to go really fast and really touch the top of your palate. And then at the same time, your tongue kind of has to make like a U in it and have it touch the top of your palate as well. So it's like a chew. And it's a weird positioning. Your tongue should be touching your palate, but leaving a space for the air to go through while the corners of your mouth are contorted in some way. And then with that, you can say chew, lu, chew, right? And it sounds like it's going up and then down in terms of its pitch too, probably because I'm doing it in a fourth tone. But that's kind of just how I've been able to learn it. Number 2, retroflex sounds like the ch and the sh and the j. A lot of people call them the curled tongue sounds because you kind of curl up your tongue into the back of my mouth. But when I first started off, I actually curled my tongue as far back as possible. So then it sounded like sh, sh, j. That's not how it's supposed to be. It's more like a little flick where if you think about how a circle is, it's not gonna be like a wave, a full wave, but rather flicking something off. If you see the movement of the flick, it's only a little bit of a curve. So the tip of your tongue should still hit around the back of your top teeth. Sh, sh, It's still curled. You're a little bit higher than where your teeth hit your gums and your top front teeth, but it's not a full circle. And then you'll have a nicer sound. As opposed to only the tip of your tongue should touch your teeth. The second example that I showed that most of my tongue was actually touching my gums. If you feel that, then that's wrong. It's like it's just the tip. Now, versus this is still something that I have a hard time with, but anything that has the E sound like ge, 唱歌, it's not gonna be 唱歌. If it's too high up in your mouth, if you feel it more in your cheekbones and in the bottom of your throat, it actually will sound more like an I as opposed to the E in pinyin. If I say versus it's a slightly different sound. And you can tell that I'm still not pronouncing it completely correct, but I'm learning how to differentiate between the two of them. If you don't change the location of where you pronounce like a S-H-I, as opposed to like ji, then you won't be able to hear the difference between the two of them. So as a cheat sheet, S-H-I, like a typical will be much softer. It sounds a little bit sweeter and more in the top of your palate, whereas a or a g is going to be more in the bottom of your throat. I actually pull out my jaw a little bit forward to help it sound more different than a traditional Next one. The third tone doesn't actually go back up. When we learn pinyin, it's like third tone is ah. That doesn't actually happen, and especially when you have multiple words going together all at once and they're all third tone, it's kind of just like a mumble on the bottom of your throat, right? You have this vocal fry, and if I remember correctly, third tone is more resembling of a vocal fry than an actual and like, I don't know why, but like they teach you in a way where they emphasize you go from a higher pitch to a lower pitch to a higher pitch, but that's actually not what it sounds like in practice. It's like, ah. So as an example, if we're trying to say the sentence, I really like to drink tea, right? 我很喜欢喝茶. You're not gonna say 我很喜欢喝茶. You would say 我很喜欢喝茶. And there's also, if you've learned Chinese before, there's that tone sandy where it's like the first two, if you see a third tone twice in a row, like 你好, it goes from a higher tone, 你好. Ni is a third tone, but it switches over to a second tone from 你好 to 你好. But if you have just a ton of third tones, when people speak fast, they slur. They don't really care as much about maintaining the integrity of the tone. Now, that does not mean that they're switching tones all willy-nilly. They're pronouncing the tones properly. They're not swapping out what they're saying. It's just gonna be like, oh, these are a kind of mumbly third kind of thing. It's probably the third tone. Whereas if it was in a higher pitch, it's probably a second tone. But this also leads me to my final pronunciation tip for today. I have a problem with my second tone blending into my third tone. If you think about going from, why can't I think of example sentences now? Let me just do that. La 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 la. I only realized this recently, but as I am trying to pronounce things, I have a tendency to incorporate the vocal fry that I mentioned was characteristic of a third tone into the other tones, especially the second tone. I was getting feedback that, why do you always swap your second and your third tones, but you know that it's second tone? It's just like when it's near a third tone, it just sounds like a third tone. And I was so confused because I'm like, isn't that the second tone? And I started to realize that the third tone is in your throat, but everything else is so far up in terms of your palate. I need to speak in a more nasal type of voice so that I can clearly define what is a third tone versus everything else, especially the second tone. I need to speak more nasally. That's kind of what the feedback was. So let's see how I sound between these two variations of just mouth placement. First one's gonna be more in the back of my throat. Second one is gonna be more in the front of my palate, trying to sound a little bit more nasally, have it be more forward centered. So first one, there should be less differentiation between the third and the second tones. 在中国，人们把农村12月30日这一年中的最后一天叫做除夕。这一天，全家人会一起吃年夜饭、守岁。但是 人们为什么要把年30叫做除夕呢? This is the second time where I'm pushing it a little bit forward, right? So there should be a difference between the third tone and the second tone now if I'm saying it correctly. Also, take note of my facial expression. It's gonna change. 在中国，人们把农村12月30日这一年中的最后一天叫做除夕。这一天，全家人会一起吃年夜饭、守岁。但是人们为什么要把年30叫做除夕呢? So you can see that there is a difference between the two of them just by nature of changing the placement of where I'm speaking. So now I'm actively practicing, okay, I need to smile more when I speak to bring my vocal patterns to go more in my palate, to be more forward-centered, to be more in my nasal cavities, because that will help me to differentiate the second tones from the third tones and sound more clear. But that's something that will definitely take me a while. And again, these are things that I have struggled with, and these are ways that I've been able to work on them. Again, my pronunciation still sucks. Now that I know what my tendencies are, I can slowly work and build towards a better pronunciation. And again, this is just an example of how you can self-correct. Find out what are your weaknesses, what things are harder for you to pronounce, and then play around with the mouth positioning, so tongue placements in the forward of your mouth, the back of your mouth, your throat, your palate, etc. Try and look into some vocal type of lessons, like singers, they have to actively move things from their head to their cheeks, to their throats, to their jaws. So look into these things because that will actually help you to change the way that you're speaking. And hopefully that will get you to sound more like a native. Those are some of the things that I have had issues with and I have found some success with. But again, this is a self-correcting thing. I will continue to self-correct and find new things that I suck at pronouncing. Suck at pronouncing things in English too, apparently. And this is just the process of language learning. Finding out what you're good at, finding out what you're not as good at, and getting constant feedback to improve. But I hope this was helpful. Maybe it was even more confusing than a native speaker would have given it. I don't know, but this is what has helped me to learn these things. So I hope that was adequate, good enough. But yeah, I will see you guys next week. I hope you have an enjoyable rest of your weeks. 再见。